So you can have an incredibly densely packed enclosure, but if your performance isn't necessarily meeting that high level, then you might need to oversize your site significantly. And so maybe you have a dense enclosure, but you have multiple more of them. And the efficiency benefit you thought you were getting from a dense enclosure kind of evaporates in that process.
Everyone is talking about energy storage density, the race to pack more megawatt hours into smaller boxes. But here's the real question. Is density actually solving the problems that owners think they're trying to solve? Or are we missing factors that determine revenue, savings, long-term performance? Today, we're going to cut through those questions and all the hype. My guests know this tension inside and out. Neha Sinha leads Wärtsilä's hardware product portfolio, and Ruchira heads their software product management team. Together, they design integrated solutions that balance density with value. Welcome, Neha and Ruchi.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Neha, the industry's been, as I said, racing towards this notion of high density, ever higher in density enclosures. What do asset owners risk leaving on the table if they only think about density?
Yeah. So I think as an industry, we have historically conflated density with technological improvements.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really comes from the not so distant past when we were talking about working with maybe single cell suppliers that had advancements in chemistry that enabled them to pack more density into the same form factor. And that just translated to a better product.
Right.
But that's not the reality of the landscape that we exist in today. And honestly, even then, that density, when you talked about an integrated enclosure, was only part of the puzzle. It wasn't the full picture. And so now in today's landscape, when we have a variety of cell suppliers offering different form factors and multiple different enclosure formats, we really have to take a look at what density really means. I think also headlines, when we see new product announcements, often highlight just the density of the enclosure. And if you take that at face value, you don't always understand exactly what the implications are there. And so as an asset owner, it's really important to ask, what problem are you actually trying to solve? And what piece does density play in that overall picture? And so, for example, I think we potentially might think easily that density translates exactly to fewer enclosures.
Right.
That if you have a higher density enclosure, you need less of them to
Smaller
build up.
Footprint.
Right. Build up your total site. But there are a couple of fallacies in that. One is that you are now seeing these modular units that have an overall higher density when integrated together, but there are multiple individual units that need to be transported, installed, serviced at site, which does increase your installation costs. And kind of similarly, you see these highly dense enclosures that also come in at a weight that's just not transportable.
Right.
And so you also have to incur then the additional installation costs of either transporting a high overweight unit or maybe even shipping modules to site to integrate at site, which is a huge upper on the installation side. And then oversizing is another huge element to this. So you can have an incredibly densely packed enclosure, but if your performance isn't necessarily meeting that high level, then you might need to oversize your site significantly. And so maybe you have a dense enclosure, but you have multiple more of them. And the efficiency benefit you thought you were getting from a dense enclosure kind of evaporates in that process. And so there's a lot of underlying elements that are important to consider that go just beyond or beyond just what is the density of this enclosure that I'm looking at in front of me.
Yeah, and you know, like to your point, performance still trumps how much you can pack on every square inch of the site. You know, Ruchi, we know that revenue isn't really always about how many cells you can fit inside that box. It's really about how much power you're delivering at the AC port. Can you talk about the use of software to maximize that calculation?
Yeah, this is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about. So when we think about how people make money, it's exactly as you said, it's how much energy they're able to push out at the AC port. And not only how much they're able to push out, but how much they're able to accurately and reliably estimate how much they'll be able to push out. Because when you're making these bids, you're having to bid in the market ahead of time. And so you need to know with a level of certainty how much energy you can push out. And so we call that the measurement of usable energy, the amount of energy that dischargeable and chargeable energy that you can dispatch at fully rated power with certainty. So what we see a lot of asset owners and traders are doing is because they don't have that level of certainty, they are then essentially creating a buffer. So if they have a 100 megawatt hour battery, rather than bidding the full 100 megawatt hours into the market, they're creating a buffer on top and below and maybe only bidding 80 megawatt hours.
Wow.
So that's 20 megawatt hours that you've paid for that is effectively stranded.
Yeah, stranded revenue, not good.
Right.
As an investor. Where does that uncertainty show up downstream in the revenue strategy beyond just the stranded revenue from the buffer?
The stranded energy, right, comes from a number of different components.
Yep.
So there are a number of things that are part of that stranded energy. So SOC error is one component of that uncertainty. Cell imbalance is another component of that stranded energy. And then the other one would be uncertainty around degradation.
Yeah.
And so then if you don't have that certainty, you are then creating that buffer, which is then resulting in lower revenue and potentially lower expected revenue than in your financial models.
Yeah, and a lack of ability to commit to capacity commitments, things like that as well, right?
Correct.
If you're unnecessarily derating the asset.
Or on the flip side, you end up, to Neha's point, you end up overbuilding the system in order to meet that commitment, because you're saying, well, I'm going to have to take this buffer. So now I have to overbuild or I have to pursue augmentation, where if you were actually able to access the full usable energy of the system, the full 100 megawatt hours of your 100 megawatt hour battery, you wouldn't have to do any of those things.
It's in a sense a bit of over... it's something I see that rolled over from how we sized solar projects in general, right? And I remember the earliest projects going into the Caribbean, they were all being oversized so that you could basically size them to hit the peak demand curve.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? With solar, it's understandable because it is naturally intermittent, because sometimes the sun goes behind a cloud, and if you have to meet a commitment, you need to oversize the solar. But with batteries, one would think that this would be much more in your control to be able to understand what is my state of charge. I don't think asset owners are asking for the moon here. They're just asking for certainty around things like state of charge estimation. And I think it's incumbent on us as integrators to be able to provide that to our customers.
Yeah, and it sounds like that intelligent control allows for more confident bidding and more confident revenue strategy.
Correct.
Some developers think they can just stitch together the software components. I've interacted with a lot of developers they're smarter than their vendors, and they want to have an off the shelf or like an in-house approach. Talk to me about the value of an integrated solution in a world where developers don't really want to get locked into one product box.
Right. So we offer an integrated software product package at Wärtsilä, which we do consider to be a distinct advantage. And I'll give you one example. So we have our BMS, we have our power plant controller, we have some battery analytics capabilities, and we have our bidding tool. So we consider that the four-legged stool. And these legs all help you maximize your revenue as an asset owner. So to give one example, we'll talk a little bit about cell imbalance. So the way that we look at this is that the BMS is the one that has the algorithm to balance the cells. So it actually is doing the cell balancing itself. The power plant controller is determining when and how often to balance and ensuring that an inverter's associated battery strings are going down to the low state of charge and resting at regular cadences in order to activate the BMS's cell balancing algorithm. Your battery analytics tool is identifying where we see cell imbalance and what the impact is, so that information is then communicated to the power plant controller, which is then determining which strings to bring down to those low SOC and rest. And then you have your bidding application, which is essentially taking this information regarding cell imbalance and then able to make the most essentially balance the aggressive and conservativeness to make the best bid possible to maximize revenue. So that's how the four-legged, fully integrated stool is able to then maximize revenue for your customers. Whereas if you adopt a more piecemeal strategy, getting a BMS from one vendor, getting a power plant controller from another, getting the battery analytics tool from another, and getting a bidding solution from a fourth, those are not operating in the same ecosystem, and you don't have those advantages of those synergies.
Yeah. Now, maybe you have experience with this on the customer side as well. Like, are there examples where folks are paying perhaps even more for an integrated solution and still winning in a bid strategy? How does that materialize?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the benefits that you get from that integrated solution pay off that value in your bidding environment, strictly because you have the ability to control holistically the system from both the hardware and software side. So Ruchi's talked a lot about cell imbalance and state of charge estimation, which are two key elements to maximizing usable energy. Another big one is managing your degradation profile.
Right.
And there are so many elements of hardware and software that have to work together to ensure that you are able to operate your system while minimizing the long-term impacts and how much energy you will have over the lifetime of the system. And so one example of that is chiller optimization. We know that degradation, the biggest drivers of it are first use of the system and then second temperature. And managing the temperature of your system is incredibly key to ensuring you have the power that you want to discharge over the lifetime of the system. And it's only when you have an integrated solution that understands how the system is operating and you have full control over your hardware elements that you can make intelligent decisions about how to operate things like your chiller, things like your temperature profile over the use and non-use of the system. And then that's the real value that you get from an integrated solution that might come at a higher upfront cost, but pays off over the lifetime of the system.
Yeah, the chiller optimization is a really great use case of the way that you see these synergies across hardware and software, and having this one integrated vendor can be beneficial. So, I mean, I think one of the things you want to think about is also the interplay between aux power consumption, round trip efficiency, as well as degradation. So what you want to be able to enable your customers to do is to be able to balance things like revenue and costs in the immediate term versus longevity and battery health over the 20-year lifespan. And one of the things that we aim to do is to provide our customers with that sort of understanding of, well, what if I wanted to run my chiller a little less and I wanted to increase the temperature that my battery is operating at? How does that impact my degradation versus how does that impact my aux consumption bills in the immediate term? So then, your customers can then make a rational decision themselves based on what makes the most sense for them from a financial perspective, because every customer is different. All of their contracts are different. The rate they pay for aux consumption is different. And so it's important to empower customers, give them the most information so they can make that trade-off between revenue and cost today versus long-time performance and battery health over the 20-year term.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the title of today's session is that not all density is created equal, but sometimes density is in fact the right answer. It's encouraging to hear that hardware and software together can help unlock that value. Are there other elements of sort of how you interact with customers around constraints, either from a site or a project level, that you'd want to elaborate on?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Site density is critical in certain projects. And in that respect, it is really important to think about how your block density translates to site density. And so we've talked about oversizing already, and that's one element. You want to minimize the number of total blocks you need to put down on site to ensure that you're within your constraints. But the other things to think about are beyond density, what are your impacts on the way that you have to structure your site? And that goes far beyond just what the batteries can do. That has to do with ordinances, your noise ordinances, your permitting requirements. That has to do with crane and forklift access. If you need aisle widths to be a significant distance to enable forklift access, those can really meaningfully increase the amount of density you're able to pack into your site. How the boxes are structured, if you can put them close together, if you can install them in a way that allows access while still minimizing the space between units, those are all factors that go into your site density that extend beyond the block density. Block density is important, but it's only one of many factors that play in when you're thinking about your end objective, which is driving the best value you can possibly within the constraints of the site that you have.
You mentioned noise ordinances. It's something we touched on in our conversation last year, and I want to remind folks sort of where we at a year on with noise in particular. Our president likes to claim that all renewables are terrible, especially wind, because it makes a lot of noise. And thankfully, up to now, our battery systems have gotten through unscathed. But this notion of noise ordinance is becoming more of a pest than we had anticipated. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, noise, it's only gotten more important in the last year. And a large driving reason is we've kind of exhausted the sites that are in the middle of nowhere and can kind of spread out. And so kind of inherent in the site density problem is also a noise problem. You're getting closer to populated areas, and you need to make sure you can comply with the local ordinances. And there are a lot of different elements to this. I think one of the big ones is when you talk about a traditional DC block BESS site, your biggest driver of noise is the inverter.
Yeah.
And so minimizing that has always been a focus. As we see more AC blocks come out, the largest driver of noise is the chiller. So we've talked a lot about chiller optimization. And this is another area where you can get the benefit of an integrated solution with software and hardware optimization together. It's not just about maximizing the performance of your system. You can also make decisions that are site specific to the kind of noise output, in this case, that you're trying to achieve.
How does it measured? Like, how do you actually assess whether or not you're under or above a noise ordinance? And then is that attenuation done in a hardware manner, a software manner, or combined?
Yeah. So the way that you measure, it's incredibly site specific. What you really care about when it comes to ordinances are far field receptors, which usually sit offsite. And that is not something you can model just strictly based on your technology alone. It has to do with where the site is located, where those receptors are located, what surrounding environment you have. So are there other industrial parks that are contributing to the noise that might be picked up by that receptor? How your site is oriented. If you have chillers kind of facing in the direction of the receptor, you're going to have a higher noise output than otherwise. And so we do testing at our block level to get kind of an indicative idea of what the noise output is. But when you're talking about complying to ordinances, it's so site specific. And you need to structure your solutions accordingly. And then for attenuation, there are, of course, hardware solutions. You've got a lot of levers to pull when it comes to noise. The easier hardware ones are things like noise kits or noise barriers, which allow you to limit the noise output of your blocks. But there are absolutely software solutions as well. So I just mentioned chiller optimization. If you know what your noise output is, especially if you've got differing day and night noise output, you can kind of coordinate that with your charge-discharge plan and maybe make a decision, a trade-off decision, not just about performance, but also about how much you're going to chill your batteries while still complying with those kind of requirements.
Yeah, so you can do things like, for example, cooling your batteries down further during the day when generally the noise requirements are less severe.
Right.
And then having them be cool at night already so that you don't have to chill them as much in the evenings when people naturally want it to be a little quieter.
Makes sense. Well, I appreciate you in indulging me with that rabbit trail down noise attenuation. There's a lot to take in as a developer around maximizing the value of the asset. We've talked about the various ways that software and hardware interplay there and how particularly being able to address the oversizing issue is one of the key benefits to better technology management, in my opinion. If the audience remembers one thing from this conversation, what do you think it should be around this concept of density and value?
I think it's that density alone does not equate value, that there are so many elements of performance that need to be considered when you're thinking about your long-term goals. And as an asset owner, it's incredibly important to ask, if you're thinking about density as a key driving decision maker for yourself, why? What is the reason for that? And back up into the root cause of what you're trying to actually solve, because density might be one of your solutions, but it's one in an array of considerations to achieve your actual end goal of driving value in your site.
I would say that they should discuss with their best partner what they're doing to maximize usable energy, because at the end of the day, that's how you're making money. And so that's what I would say, that you should make sure you're asking questions. What do they do? What are their strategies? And how are they helping you at the end of the day?
Neha Sinha is the product manager for hardware portfolio at Wärtsilä Energy Storage. Shah is lead for software product management. Thank you both for taking time to help us understand better this conundrum with density and technology integration.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.